Emily with DL-Emily. Welcome back to another video. We are going to be talking today about how much money to spend on Facebook ads, or how to go about setting that budget for your Facebook ad campaigns. Primarily going to be focusing on how to think about that if you've never run a campaign before and you really don't know where to start, you don't have any data to go off of. But we will also talk about if you have been running campaigns in the past and you have some data to work with, how to use that to set that budget at an optimal place. We're kind of going to be focusing on Facebook ads here just because the most questions come up about that platform specifically, because it's a little less cut and dry than like a Google or more transactional channel. All of these tactics and mechanisms will pretty much apply to most advertising channels you may potentially be using. Let's get started. If you have never run a campaign before, it can be very daunting to determine what that initial budget is. And this is by far the most common question we get when we're onboarding new clients is like, how much is this going to cost me? You know, is it going to be hundreds of dollars? Is it going to be thousands of dollars? Is it going to be tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars? People really just don't know. So I'm here to kind of demystify that for you and help answer that question, because there's no cut and dry answer. It really is, it depends. The best place to start if you have no idea where to begin is with what your goal is. So if you're running this campaign and you want to get, let's say, $20,000 in sales, we need to start with that initial, kind of the bottom end goal, and work backwards into what that looks like from a budget perspective. So what is the goal? Is it $20,000 in sales? Is it a certain number of units that you want to sell? Is it a certain number of new clients you want to get onboarded? Is it a certain number of leads or demos? So from there, we need to sort of have an idea of how much you are willing to pay for that metric to happen. So let's take, for example, the $20,000 in sales. You need to understand what your average order value is. Say your average order value is $100, your goal is to get 20,000. That means you need to get 2,000 sales, give or take, to reach that $20,000 goal. If you are aiming towards a revenue metric, but you also have kind of a lead generation model, so again, like you're a SaaS company, you're trying to direct people towards demos or free trials, you need to also have an idea of how many of those leads turn into a sale, how many of those demos turn into a sale, so we can determine that number of demos, that number of leads you need to get in order to reach, you know, what that bottom line goal is. Now that we have an idea of how many we need to get, like whether that be orders, whether that be demos, leads, etc. Now we need to determine how much you are willing to pay for each of them. If it's a brand new campaign, generally I recommend you start with a break-even number. Like, what is the worst case scenario, the most we can pay to, you know, not lose money, more or less. Fear not if that is daunting to you, because when you first start a campaign and you have no data to go off of, your CPAs are going to be as high as they ever will, and as the campaign runs, you collect data and optimize, that number will come down. So I recommend starting with a break-even CPA, because you do want to make sure you're being generous enough with the budget where you can collect that data and learn quickly. Whereas, you know, if you're being too stingy with it, you're not going to get those learnings at the same degree, and the campaign's just not going to be as efficient. So how do we determine what that break-even number is? Well, you want to consider what your profit margins are, again, how much you're making on that average order, therefore how much are you willing to pay to break even. You know how many conversions you need, and you know how much you're willing to pay for them, and at this point you just multiply those two together, and that is your starting budget. Whatever that conversion metric is that you used to back into that budget should be what the campaign is being optimized towards. All right, so that's kind of how you would go about setting a budget for a new campaign. If you're running an existing campaign and it's going fairly well, you may want to start scaling up that budget. Now, there are a lot of resources online that will tell you, like, okay, now you can use all of this data, your click-through rates, your CPMs, your conversion rates, and you can take, again, that sort of goal backwards measure to back into an optimal budget. But at this point, you know whether or not the campaign is working. Especially if you're using automated bidding, there's a lot of value in letting things continue to kind of work the way that they're working with minor changes. So for that reason, I usually suggest you start scaling the budget up like 10 to 20%, kind of at a gradual incremental basis until you sort of reach that point of diminishing returns where you're no longer getting the same caliber of results that you were before. And vice versa, if the campaign is is not performing well, you can scale the budget down, but generally I would suggest maybe doing some analysis, looking at where you can maybe redistribute it, which campaigns are performing better than others, that maybe you want to take some money away from the lesser performing, put them towards the better performing, go through and find some low-hanging fruit as far as like creative goes. Look at your frequency as well, because if your frequency is really high, you're likely over delivering your ads and therefore you're spending more than you need to. Try to nudge that frequency cap down to maybe expand the reach of your campaigns. If the campaign is not performing, generally I would start by maybe reallocating the budget and seeing how you can tweak the delivery a little bit rather than starting to scale it down. Some other things to consider when you're setting your budget. Competition. So mostly pertaining to Facebook, but this is going to be true for Google as well. If your competition is becoming more aggressive, they're increasing their budgets, they're running more campaigns, that is going to affect your costs and increase it. The data in your campaign will be indicative of an increase in competitive pressure. If, for instance, your visibility, your impressions, your reach is decreasing, but your CPMs are increasing. You also want to consider like seasonality. Is it Black Friday? Are people going to be spending a lot of money on your product potentially? That might be a time you want to increase the budget. If you're running a brand awareness campaign versus a leads or conversions campaign, the budget is a little bit more challenging to set in the beginning, just because you're not going to have that same kind of click to conversion, CPA optimization that you would have with a lower funnel campaign. So for that, if it's an awareness campaign, you kind of want to look at the size of the audience that you're going after and take into account the average frequency. So for instance, if you are targeting, let's say, a very niche audience, like people who practice yoga in a small town, the budget can be pretty small, $100 to $300 honestly to start, and again, you can scale that up as it performs better. And then, if the audience becomes more broad, you're targeting, let's say, beauty enthusiast females across the US, that budget is gonna look more like in the thousands. That's just kind of how I personally will go about setting that budget without having to overcomplicate things with a bunch of metrics that you may or may not have to go off of. As with everything in digital advertising, and I say this pretty much in every video, but I'll say it again, you don't just wanna set the budget and forget it. As I mentioned, a bunch of those variables can change over time, your conversion rates, the competitive pressures, just consumer behavior in general. You wanna make sure you're constantly reevaluating, you're looking at how they're performing, you're keeping an eye on those metrics that matter to you, whether that's CPA, ROAS, etc., optimizing and redistributing the budget as needed. I hope this was helpful, just giving you an overview of how to go about setting your budget when you're first getting started, and over time how you can maybe think about optimizing it. If you want more information on how to get started with a Facebook ads campaign, how to go about the budget, we do have an entire blog post on our website on this topic where we go into a little bit more detail. And of course, if you need help getting started with a new campaign or a new advertising strategy, then you can request a free marketing plan from us, where we will evaluate your business and help guide you on how you can use digital advertising to maximize your business success, your goals. And so I will link to that down below so you can make sure to get yours. And I hope that this video was helpful for you. If it was, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up so we know to make more like it. Go ahead and subscribe to our channel so you continue to get some marketing tips and tricks. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you in the next video.